Hi, Megan.
Hi, Claire. It's so fun to be here.
It's really good to have you here as well. We met quite a lot of years ago, actually.
I think it was 2018, I think. So yeah.
Okay, okay, and obviously a lot's happened since then. Um, Tell us who you are and why we're so interested in what you're up to, because what you're up to is just so cool.
Amazing. Well, so I'm a breast milk scientist. And when we met over 8 years ago, I was just starting out my research program. I had been a microbiome scientist before that. So I was studying sort of the good bacteria that live in and on our bodies, mostly in babies, and learning about those microbes and what they do. And one of the big discoveries from that early work was that breast milk is so important to the baby's microbiome.
Amazing. Could you give us like a synopsis of what the microbiome actually is? Because I think we
Yeah.
hear about it quite a lot, but a lot of us are like, yeah, it's a thing in the gut and it's important, but I don't quite know why. Like what exactly is the microbiome?
Right. And that's been a neat shift in sort of public consciousness because when I started studying the microbiome, that was around 2010. And I would say back then, a lot of people had not heard that word before. They're like, what? Now it feels like most people have heard this word, but like you say, they might not really understand what it means because you can now buy, food for your microbiome, soap for your microbiome, all sorts of, some legitimate and some gimmicky products. But what is it? So the microbiome is all these tiny microbes that live in and on our bodies. So microbes are bacteria, also viruses and other tiny single-celled organisms. And I would say for most of human history, recent human history, people would think of microbes as bad things. These make us sick, right? And they can, right? We've just lived through a pandemic that was a virus that made many people sick. There are bacteria that can make you sick. But what we know now in the last, say, 15 or 20 years is that actually there's a lot of microbes living in and on our bodies that are very good and they do good things for us. And actually, we wouldn't survive without them.
Wow.
So it's the study of these good microbes. And you mentioned our gut, and that's certainly the sort of biggest place in our body that microbes are living. So in our intestines, we have lots of microbes, and they help us digest our food. So there's actually foods that we as humans, with our own kind of enzymes and abilities, cannot digest, but our microbes help us digest those foods and get calories and nutrients out of them. Some of those microbes are also making vitamins that we cannot make ourselves. Some of them are producing compounds that then get out of our gut, they get absorbed into our bloodstream, and they travel all over our body. So, like to our brain, to our lungs, etc. And they're not only in our gut. There's a lot of them there, and that's what a lot of people focus on: gut health, gut microbiome. But we have a microbiome on our skin. We have a microbiome in our nose, and we'll talk about that today. So, kind of all over our body, the vaginal microbiome is actually really important. People are studying that for in terms of fertility and preterm birth. So, there's microbes all over us. If you were actually able to count the number of microbes in your body, there would be about at least two, maybe up to 10 times more microbes in your body than there are human cells. So, at that level, like we are more microbe than we are human.
So we're in a completely synergistic relationship with
Oh
these tiny,
yeah.
tiny, tiny little things that we can't see.
Yeah, we actually have a word for that we call symbiosis. So
Yeah,
the idea that it's like two or thousands of organisms living together. So yes, the human, but also all these other tiny little organisms that we need them, and they need us.
that was the starting point then for you.
Yeah, this was the starting point. I was part of this big study called the Child Study, which stands for Canadian Healthy Infant Longitudinal Development Study, CHILD for short. And the idea of this study was to understand why this generation of kids has so many more allergies and asthma than previous generations. So most people, at least in Western countries, are familiar with this. I don't know about you, but when I went to school as a kid, I would have peanut butter sandwich every day for lunch. And now that's not allowed, right? Because there are so many kids with peanut allergies. And like, how has this happened so quickly? Our genes, our genomes as humans has not changed in one generation. But maybe our environment has changed, maybe our microbiome has changed. So the child study was developed with that question in mind. Can we watch a big group of babies be born and grow up? Some of them will develop allergies, some of them will not. And then can we look back and see what was different about those children when they were maybe in the womb or babies? What triggered these allergies? And so to answer that question, the idea was to capture as much information as possible about these babies and their families and their environment. So, is it something they're parents were eating? Is it something about the way they were born, about what's in their house as they grow up? So to just be really broad and capture many aspects of growing up. And part of that was collecting biological samples. So we took like blood samples from all the parents and babies to look at their genetics to see is there some sort of like inherited component that's contributing to allergies. But also, we went to every family's house and checked what kind of cleaning chemicals did they use and vacuumed up dust so we could measure things in the dust.
Wow.
What kind of furniture, like how many plants do they have? Do they have pets? All of these questions. And one of the things those original scientists did was to collect diapers from the babies. And they didn't have a firm plan in mind of what to do with those, but very shortly thereafter, this was around 2009. So this is right around the time the microbiome was like coming on the scene as a really big, important aspect of human health. So they realized, oh, we could study the microbiome from these diaper samples. That's how we normally study the gut microbiome in humans is from poop. So they got some funding to do that, and that's how I joined the study initially was to study the diapers and the microbiomes. And we knew at that point, we wanted to understand is this microbiome linked later on to allergies and asthma? But this was the stage of the study where we're still recruiting pregnant moms. So like it's going to be several years before these babies are born and grow up and maybe get allergies or maybe don't. So in the meantime, we said, well, let's just look at the microbiome, see what it even looks like, because that was a big frontier at the time. And then we saw, oh, they're very different. Like babies, even though you'd think, oh, they're babies, they're kind of all the same, but no, they have very different microbiomes. And then the next question is like, why are they different? And at that time, the two very big things that were shaping the microbiome was, yes, how they were born, so C-section or vaginal delivery, which makes sense. Like that's your first exposure to microbes in the world, right? Is when you're first born. And then breast milk versus formula. We also did find smaller impacts from things like if they lived in a house with pets or siblings, and you can imagine pets and siblings are bringing
Yeah.
in other microbes from the world. We did find small associations with things like the types of cleaning chemicals or the amount of cleaning that was going on in the home. A lot of people use cleaners that are antibacterial. So yes, they're intended to like get rid of the bad microbes that might make you sick, but those can also affect our good microbes. But sort of like more than any of those things, all put together actually was breast milk. So much more than cleaning chemicals, pet siblings, and even quite a bit more than the C-section delivery was breast milk. Like this is the thing in early life that is shaping the microbiome very clearly.
So is that where you suddenly went, okay, I want to look more into that then, or
Yeah, exactly. And it was sort of fortunate for me that, again, like looking back a few years to the scientists who planned this study before I was on the scene, they also thought to collect breast milk samples from the moms. And it wasn't because they thought, oh, this will be important for the microbiome, which no one was thinking about at the time. But there are environmental scientists in the study who are interested in exposure to different environmental toxins and chemicals. And they thought, well, we should be looking, they collected urine samples, like we could look there to see if people are exposed. But also they said, well, let's look in the breast milk. So that's why it was collected. But by the time I was on the scene, kind of those people had moved on to other things and no one was doing anything with the breast milk. So I said, wow, I have a different question about breast milk. Like, can I use it? And I was granted permission to do that. So I started initially, honestly, it was pretty hard to get funding to look at breast milk because it's not a topic that maybe a lot of funders like to fund. They think, it's just breast milk, it's just baby food, it's just yeah. But
that's a
eventually,
whole podcast in itself, isn't it?
yes,
Maybe we'll do that as well, but yeah.
totally. So I was able to get like one small grant to look at one thing in the breast milk. And
Wow.
breast milk is many things. And I always had this dream, like I want to look at all the things all at once because that's how a baby drinks breast milk, right? It's all the things
Yeah.
mixed together. But you got to start small. So the first grant I got was to look at the microbiome of the breast milk, because that was one question. Like, well, why is breast milk important to the microbiome of the baby? Is it because it has its own microbiome and it's giving microbes? Or maybe it's something else. I got another grant to look at what's called human milk oligosaccharides, or HMOs for short. These are actually a really important part of breast milk for the microbes because they're food for good microbes. So these are complex carbohydrates or sugars. Complex meaning they're made of many little blocks of individual sugars, and they're arranged in such a way that, again, the human baby or adult for that matter cannot digest them. And so for a long time, it was sort of known they were in breast milk, but it was like, well, what are they doing there? If the baby cannot digest them, what's the point of these? And yet clearly the mother's body is investing energy to create these HMOs, put them in the milk, but not for the baby. Like that's a bit odd. And so again, as scientists start learning about the microbiome, it was like, oh, they're there to feed the baby's microbes. So yeah, I got a little grant to study the HMOs, and then over time I was able to get some bigger grants and start looking at this all the different things. So there's also fatty acids. So these are lipids that do provide energy to the baby, but also can influence immune signaling, influence the microbes. We've started studying the antibodies in breast milk, which antibodies can help us humans fight off infections, but antibodies can also sort of bind to microbes and help them do things.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's one in milk called IgA,
Yeah.
and it's the most abundant antibody in milk. So there's different ones. There's IgG and there's IgM, but IgA is the biggest one in milk. It's like over 90% of antibodies in milk are IgA. And we're learning that this IgA, it binds to microbes. And then for some of them, like it's really kind of clever. For some of them, the ones that are pathogens or bad microbes that might make the baby sick, they seem to glob on and make them pass through. Like, let's get rid of these. We don't want them in there. But for some of the good bacteria, they bind them and they actually help them stick and help them take up root. So it's like it's not the same effect of this antibody for different microbes.
Yeah. So
So yeah, there's so
clever.
many things in microbes and or in milk, and we're trying to study them all and understand how they work as a system for the baby.
That's so clever. I've been doing this 11 years and I didn't know that bit. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
learn so much just during this conversation. This is a whole, I keep perceiving this in the sort of the ultimate superhero movie thing. It's just so complex and it's so many
It
moving
is.
parts, and it's not the sort of your typical superhero who does it all by himself. It's a big system.
Oh yeah, there's many players in there. It's like a big team, which is why I think it's so important to understand milk as this complex system with many different players all working together, because when you focus on one at a time, you sort of ignore the fact that it's a team effort. There's many players, and then you start to, oh, okay, I understand this one. It's important. Could I give this one to babies and like help them be healthier? And unfortunately, like that would be nice, but it doesn't seem to work that way because, take the HMOs, for example. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of these HMOs, each with a different structure in milk. And so there's like a couple of them that you can actually buy off the shelf as an additive, or you can put it in a baby formula, but like that's just one or two out of 100. And the truth is, even if we could make all 100, which today we don't have the technology to do that, but if we figured that out, like the next question is, okay, so what's the recipe? Like, how much of each one are we going to put in this alternative? And there's no answer to that actually, because every mom is making a different recipe of milk for her baby. So which one are you trying to replicate? And even if you could somehow figure that out, like even within one mom, her own milk is changing over time as the baby grows. And even within one day, it's changing like from morning to night. So if you're trying to pin that down into one recipe to replicate, like that's an impossible task.
I know we could talk about so much, and you have a couple of new papers that are
Mhm.
just fresh and that we really want to talk about, and we're going to talk about one in particular today. But is there a thread? Like, what got you to the next sort of like, okay, now I want to know this?
Yeah. So, I mean, what you described, I think, is kind of the definition of a scientist. We ask questions. That's our job, right? We look at things, we ask questions. Sometimes we answer the question, but usually the answer brings us seven more questions. So, yes, it was like, oh, the microbiome is very profoundly shaped by breastfeeding. Why is that? Well, let's look in the breast milk. And I happen to have the breast milk from all these babies in the first study that we did. So let's dive in and try and understand which parts of the milk, because of course, milk is doing many jobs at once, right? It is feeding the baby and it is protecting them from infections and it is shaping their metabolism. So it's got many jobs, but one of them is about the microbiome. So, how does that work? So started diving in, and I met a researcher who studies these HMOs in particular. So I thought, oh, let's work together, study the HMOs, and then I met other researchers who study the antibodies. So one of the like new papers we have is showing how breastfeeding early in life shapes the microbiome over time,
Mm.
not only in the gut but also in the nose, and how that shapes risk or asthma or prevention of asthma in the babies. Because by this point, those original babies had grown up to be 5 years old. And when they were 5 years old, we had them all come back to the research center, and we have expert clinicians who are able to assess them and diagnose which babies have asthma, children by this point, and which do not. So we now have that information, sort of the end of the tunnel. We know who got asthma, who didn't, so we can look back and say, okay, were there differences in breastfeeding patterns? Were there differences in their gut microbiome, their nose microbiome, and like how does this all fit together? So that's one of our recent papers. Having had the patients to wait for the babies to all grow up, we could now put this all together. And what we found was that, yes, breastfeeding was very important, not only for the gut microbiome, which by this point many people have shown again and again in different studies, but also for the nose microbiome. This was one of the first studies to look at the nose microbiome. And we saw it was also true there. And you wonder, well, makes sense that, the milk is shaping the gut microbiome because the baby's literally eating the milk and it's going into their gut. But like, how does this work for the nose? And if you're a mom, which I know you are, you've probably seen like babies spit up and kind of regurgitate and milk goes in their nose.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes you think, oh, poor baby, like, why does it work this way? And my favorite quote is from a breastfeeding medicine doctor. And she goes, Megan, that's a feature, not a bug. Meaning, like, it's not an accident that milk is going in the nose of babies. Like, this is on purpose. This is helping them shape their nose microbiome. It's also putting antibodies in their nose, which like you breathe in
Yeah,
viruses in the air, right? So this like coats the nose with these protective antibodies.
that's amazing. So
Um,
something that we as mothers could perceive as a problem and be like, "Oh, my poor
yeah,
kid, I don't want that. I
right.
don't
No,
want that
this
to
is
be
normal. This
happening."
is
It's
on
like
purpose.
you could be looking at that going, "Yes, come on, yeah,
Yeah.
that's my boy."
Yes, exactly. So,
That's
so the
wild.
nose microbiome and the gut microbiome were both clearly being shaped by breast milk.
Wow.
And what's more, so in this study, we looked at 3 months, which was that first time that we took diaper samples and nose swabs of the babies. We did it again when they were 1 year old. So here we started looking at like that entire continuum of the first year, and we saw that the timing was really important. So it was a little informative, but not very much to say, let's look at 3 months. How are the microbiomes? And does this tell us who's going to get asthma or not? You could sort of make a guess and it would be okay, but wasn't super accurate. You could do it again at 1 year. Maybe that's a better time point. Like, does the microbiome predict asthma? Again, like a little bit, but not great. But it was when you put that information all together and look at the timing of the first year that we started to get much better predictions of who would get asthma. So it told us that it's not just about having a certain microbe or not having a certain microbe, right? Like if you have this good one, you're good. If you have this bad one, oh no. It was more about the timing of when they arrived, which really gets at the fact that microbiomes are evolving as the baby grows. So there might be a microbe that's it's actually really good to have this microbe when you're 1 year old, but it's not good if it shows up at 3 months. Like the baby's not ready for it, their immune system's not ready for it, or vice versa. There might be microbes that you really need early on, and then you kind of want them to go away later because they've done their purpose and you don't need them anymore.
This is within the milk. They're getting it from the milk
Um,
in the nose, or is it just from
well, that's a
wherever?
great question. So some of them might come from milk. I would say a minority of them. Like we study the microbes in milk, and milk does have microbes. I one time was interviewed, and the headline was like, "Milk is teeming with microbes." And I went, like there are microbes in there for sure. But if you compared like
Okay.
when we study poop samples, like those are teeming with microbes. They're full of microbes. Milk has some microbes. We call it low biomass though. Like it has microbes, but like a low level. That's normal. There's not none, which is what people assumed before. Like, oh, if you're healthy, then your breast milk is like sterile. It has no microbes because microbes are bad. We now know, oh, that's not true. There actually are microbes in there and they're good. And there's not too many of them, but there's some. And we do think some of them help the baby by like taking root. Some of them don't, though. They seem to like pass through. And I actually have someone joining my team this year who's interested in that. Like, if there's microbes in the milk, but we don't find them taking up root in the baby, are they important? Are they doing something? Are they producing things that are useful to the baby? Or are they just kind of there by accident? Fair enough. So we're studying that. Um, but yes, there are microbes in milk. Some of them help the baby, but also it's these other things in the milk, like the HMOs, the antibodies that are helping guide the microbes in the baby. So it's both
Okay.
microbes and other things.
Okay, the sort of if say in the first 6 months or the first year, as you say, there's an arrival of microbes at different stages from maybe from wherever, from the park, the playground, the whatever the environment. How does a baby say receive that at 6 months but not at 3 months, or at 1 year but not at, or did it but it didn't get processed? I'm a little bit lost about how that works then.
So
Or am I
we could think
totally
of it as
lost?
both like seeding. No, no, this is a great question. We
Okay,
could think
cool.
like the milk is both seeding and feeding the microbiome, right? So it's seeding the microbiome with microbes in the milk, but it's
Yeah.
also feeding the microbiome with the right foods.
Yeah.
So the right HMOs for the right microbes that we want to stick around. And then the baby is getting microbes from its environment, right? It's slobbering on its toys, it's out in the park, it's got siblings and pets. So microbes are kind of always coming at this baby. And then some of them are going to stick and some of them are not. And milk is helping sort of decide which microbes are going to stick, which microbes are not. It's helping sort
Okay.
out like the good guys, the bad
Okay.
guys. And so, because you can have a microbe sort of, it's on a toy, the baby slobbers on the toy, gets in the gut. Is it going to start replicating and like take up root there, or is it just going to pass through? That's what the milk is helping with, right? If it's got particular
Mhm.
HMOs or antibodies that are like, this is a good bacteria, let's help it make a home here. Or it's like, this is not a good bacteria, let's get rid of it. And milk is able to kind of guide those decisions, if we want to call them, in the baby's gut.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Right, right, right. God, that's
and then the timing again matters because a particular microbe that lands up in the baby's gut at 3 months, it might be like, we don't want this here. Like, we're not ready for this. Get rid of it. But at 1 year, it might be like, huh, we're ready for this guy and we want him here. So
okay.
let's keep
God,
him around.
that's like that's proper intelligence. That feels
Yeah.
like
And like,
wait, what?
and this is one of because we talked about, right, how milk is changing over time. So the milk that the baby's getting at 3 months is going to have particular sort of guiding signals and decisions. Whereas the milk a baby is getting at 1 year is going to be quite different. And
Yeah.
therefore, it's going to select for different bacteria. Also, the baby's own immune system is evolving over this time. So it's going to like sort of reject and accept different bacteria. So there's like the immune system is changing, the milk is changing. This is all helping the microbiome to change. And the microbiome is interacting with the immune system. So it's all this kind of orchestrated choreography of the microbiome development over time. And milk is really like the director of that orchestra. It's setting the pace, we like to say. So um, we found that babies at that 3 month time when we took our first sample, if they were completely just drinking their mother's own milk, human milk, then we saw over the rest of that first year that there was this very gradual increase in the diversity or the complexity of the microbiome, sort of happening at this gradual pace as the milk changes, as the immune system changes, you see the microbiome change along with it. And that normal gradual pace was associated later on with low risk of asthma when we diagnosed the kids at 5 years of age. In contrast, for the babies at 3 months who had switched to formula, we saw that their microbiome, it did not have this nice gradual pace. It actually like prematurely exploded into diversity too soon. So it's not that any of these microbes are specifically bad in and of themselves, but the timing was
Mm.
bad. Like they came too soon. And that we think triggered a series of events in the immune system that then predisposed these babies to have asthma later on. So it's this like premature acceleration of the microbiome, which is another topic. Like people often think, if you've heard of the microbiome, you often hear, oh, a diverse microbiome is a good microbiome. You want diversity. And that is oversimplified, but also generally true for adults. Like in adults, you want different microbes, you want to eat different foods that support different microbes. But this is not true in babies. Like people often say, babies
Yeah.
are not just small adults, right? Babies have an immature immune system, their gut is still developing. We don't want them to have a super diverse microbiome too soon. And that's what human milk is helping to regulate because human milk is one very specific food. It's changing at this like sort of specific pace and it's going to regulate what microbes come and when they arrive.
Wow.
So for me, a message in this paper was like it's all about timing. The timing is really important. It's not that this microbe A is like bad or good. It's also about when it's arriving,
Wow.
and milk is really making that determination.
That's incredible. Is there was there sort of data up to 1 year or in terms of like the correlation between breastfeeding for how long and how, like how did you it seems
Yeah,
like piecing together like or
true.
was
So
there is there
we
data for breastfeeding beyond a year and or like
Yeah, so in this study that again, it's still the child study that we're talking about, we collected samples at 3 months and 1 year. So we were limited to looking at those time points. If I could go back with a time machine or start a new study, I would say I want milk and microbiome samples like every day, or that might be excessive, but
yeah.
every month, let's look so we can see how it's actually changing month by month. We didn't have that opportunity here, so we looked at these two time points that we had. Um, And we looked at breastfeeding at 3 months. Like, is this baby exclusively breastfeeding or have they started to get formula? Because that's when we had the microbiome sample. But that doesn't mean 3 months is like a magic time. It's just the time we happen
Yeah,
to
yeah.
sample our babies, which is a good question though, because this research has been, covered in the news and made it to different, and sometimes it gets perceived as, oh, 3 months is how long you have to breastfeed to have a good microbiome. And it's like, no, no, that's not what we're saying. It's just what we were able to study, which is a whole other podcast, maybe, right? Like, how long should you breastfeed? What's the ideal, like, spoiler, there's no like
Oh,
one answer to that because it depends
yeah.
what you're asking about, right? Are you asking about the microbiome, about asthma, about obesity, about all of these things that breastfeeding can impact?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
we do have data about breastfeeding beyond 1 year in this study. We tracked that up to 2 years. So it's been on my to-do list to like look more into the importance of breastfeeding beyond 1 year. We definitely do see a signal at the 1 year when we look at the gut microbiome and the nose microbiome. We can very clearly tell apart the babies that are still breastfeeding from those that aren't because their microbiomes are different. What happens beyond that in this study is not something we can ask because we stopped taking microbiome samples. Um, well, until they were 8. We've just now had them at 8 years and sequenced those data, and we're seeing them again. They're 16 now. We're seeing them again, but we've
Wow.
finally finished the 8 year. So we'll be able to look that far out. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if by 8 and 16 years of age, you can no longer tell from the microbiome who was breastfed and who was not, because that's so long ago in the past, and the microbiome is constantly reacting to your diet and your environment. But that is not to say that the early feeding and the early microbiome doesn't have a really long-term impact, because I absolutely believe it does. It's just that you're not seeing it in the microbiome anymore. Now you're seeing it in the immune system, which the microbiome has, shaped early in life, and
Yeah.
that's what has the
And
long-term
an
impact.
allergy like asthma or something, that's an overactive immune system, right?
That's a good way to summarize it, is these are both immune disorders. So an allergy is your immune system overreacting, reacting to yourself or to something like
Yeah.
peanuts when it shouldn't. So this is, yes, a disruption to immune development. And we know that the microbes early in life are really interacting with the immune system to shape how it's going to function for the rest of your life. So that's why we call it this very critical window of time in early life.
Got it. Gosh. Because I've got a host of really bad allergies, and an allergy to salicylates, which is in everything. It took years to figure it out, and I wasn't breastfed. I was kind of breastfed, but it was at the time when mums were brought to their babies, or the babies were brought to the mums every 4 hours.
Mhm.
This was 1975 in Switzerland, and my mum sort of remembers very clearly being that woman who was like, "Can I please be with my baby?" And they'd be like, "No, no, madame, you need to rest." And she'd
Mhm.
be like, "No, bring me my baby. No, no, we won't." And then mysteriously, breastfeeding didn't work out for any of the women, basically.
Right.
But that was very squarely put on the women. It's like, oh, well, your body's not making enough milk, and oh, well, and my mum is now 80, but she at the beginning of the human milk, my human milk project, she was just like, oh, we didn't know any of this. She helped me set so much of this project up because her outrage endured. She's like, how dare they have made that decision for me? Like, I wanted you with me, but they just wouldn't bring you. And that was the hospital
Yeah.
policy. It was the first 3, 4 days of life. And, so, but
Just
now
like overriding the maternal instinct, right? Like, oh, we know
completely.
best. We are the and
Completely. No,
of
we know
course,
better. We know better. You need, we know what you need, and the sort of the maternal body kind of screaming, no, but what are you going to do if you've got,
yeah,
doctors saying, no, 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 you're going to damage your baby if you don't do what we say, and you just go, okay then, because we don't know what we don't know when we're, starting out. So, but yeah, now I deal on a daily basis. My diet is ridiculous because I have to, and I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. I mean, this is
yeah,
completely anecdotal. I understand that, but sometimes I just go, I do wonder,
totally. Well, and they
like,
are, allergies are multifactorial, meaning there's many factors that could contribute, and the factors in contributing in one case might be different than another, which
yeah,
is why this study was set up to capture so many things, right? The cleaning chemicals, the, how much exercise you get, what your mom ate while she was pregnant, what you were fed. So, but I think very clearly breastfeeding is playing a role in the development of the immune system. And that is what was quite beautiful about this specific study that we're talking about, because we were able to go from, okay, we have information on everything that happened in childbirth and pregnancy. And then we have breast milk samples and we have microbiome samples. And then, at 5 years, we know who got asthma and who did not. So we can look back and start to piece this story together. And Um, the aspect of the timing for me was a really big lesson from this paper. An analogy I like to use. So you're in England, I think trifle is a common like dessert.
Yeah.
We have I've been in, Italy, I talk about tiramisu, but these are like we have in Canada something called an Nanaimo bar, but they're all what they have in common. They're like delicious desserts that have sort of beautiful layers, right? So if you think of that, you have the ingredients that you need to make this dessert, but you cannot just throw them all in a bowl at once and be like, here we go, right? You have to add them in the right order and the right time to get this proper outcome. And that's kind of like a baby's microbiome and immune system. You cannot just have all the right microbes and expect, I'll just throw them all in at 3 months and we're good to go. Like, no, you have to add this one first, then this one next, and have them correctly in the right order to get the right outcome.
It's so much more complex than I even knew. Like, and I've
It
been
is.
down
And
this rabbit
then
hole for quite a while. So
right, like we're always learning new things. And then it's so how do we use this knowledge to help make all babies healthier? And like I think one message is certainly like breast milk is so clever and important and we can't really replicate it. It's changing over time. So let's support moms to breastfeed. We know that most of them want to do that. Like the data show that in Canada, 90% of them or more start out breastfeeding in the hospital. Like they've made this choice, they want to breastfeed. But then so many of them have stopped sooner than they wanted to. And when you ask them why, if their answer is like, well, I decided I have enough, like totally fair, like your choice.
yeah,
But over 80% of the moms who stopped too soon, they say, oh, it's well because I had a problem and like no one was there to help me, or I had an issue basically, and I was failed by the system. So I think this information can be brought to the system, to the people who make decisions, and say, look how important this is. Please make policies to support. But then also for the babies that, for whatever reason, are not able to get their mother's own milk, and there are many legitimate reasons, like what do we give them instead? And by learning the importance of this timing, I think that can really help us support those babies. Um, it's complicated, but I think we can get steps closer by understanding how this biology works.
yeah, it's complicated, but like you said, it's not about uh pushing anyone into anything they don't want to do. Like so many women want to do this. It's like if you don't want to, that's cool. Totally
Yeah,
cool with
that's
me.
totally cool.
Like but it's heartbreaking, it's enraging, it's just plain wrong that so many of us want to, like really want to. And I know Professor Amy Brown's written books about this and why breastfeeding grief matters and so
Yes.
forth. That the long-term grief and really mixed feelings that go on in women. I mean, I speak to women all the time about this. Every time I say what I do, everyone has a story, and it's either one of sort of perseverance and, well, I mean, there's always perseverance involved in all of them, but in the sense of breast milk, and it kind of worked, um, and then there's a big story there, or it didn't work, and there's a big story there, and either way, the emotions are so strong,
Yeah.
and it's not benign. It's not whatever. So
Wow.
it's it's a very passionate topic, and it seems to me like a really kind of good place to start with humanity and who do we want to be as a species? Like, how do we want to live? How do we want to? Where do we put our energy? Where do we put our money? Where do we put our focus? And it seems to me that sort of our children is a bit of a no-brainer for me. I mean, our own health, obviously, and the health of our children.
100%. And honestly, like breastfeeding is one of the few things, maybe the only thing that does both. Like it addresses the
Yeah.
health of the mom and the children, right? Both generations, right? And this is one area that I haven't personally done much research on, although I'm starting to think about it. Like in this study where we have focused on the babies, like the moms are there at each visit, and we ask them questions about their health, and we collect samples from them. So I am starting to work on a few projects and collaborate with others, people who are interested in like, okay, like what about the moms? Like which ones are getting diabetes or high blood pressure? Is that related to whether or not they breastfed? So a whole other aspect of like why this is important. It's important to both. And what other aspects of health or the world like affect two generations at once? I think there's not many.
Yeah, I mean we've touched on this together, haven't we? And that's yet another podcast. We got a lot of work to do, like
Yeah.
about this thing about women's health that is really coming to the forefront. It's finally seems to be on the map somehow. There's a lot of talk about menopause. There's a lot of talk
Yeah.
about which is I'm hitting now because I started this 11 years ago and I was an old I think I'm called I was classed as a geriatric mother
Oh,
when I was 38,
I'm a,
right?
yes. Isn't that the
But
awful term? My mom, I have two younger brothers, and by the time the youngest was born, she was over 35 too. And yes, she was called geriatric, and it still bothers her.
yeah, I'm like, no, no, thank
I'm
you.
like,
I don't, but anyway, yeah, thank you. But so now, yeah, now the kind of and all the women who were sort of very invested in breastfeeding and babyhood at that time, now we're all kind of hitting menopause and we're going, wait, what?
yeah.
So, but that's great that there's a lot of conversations going around that. But it does seem like women's health is finally kind of getting a bit of momentum. And I know that you and I have talked, and you have had an interest in this, and I love that because obviously breastfeeding has we there are kind of studies around breast cancer, ovarian cancer, various kind of things. But do you see other areas that we ought to be looking as well, or that are coming up as?
Yeah, I think the cancer studies are really interesting, partly because they just are, partly because actually my original training in science was in cancer research. So I've always had an interest there of like, cancer's fascinating to me because it's not an infection, it's our own body kind of going wrong. And how does that happen? So yes, the fact that moms who have breastfed, and it seems to be like the longer cumulatively, however many children they've had and breastfed, the longer lactation history they have, the more they are protected from certain types of cancers. And why might that be? And that sort of link or association has been shown over a few different studies over a number of years. It's sort of known, but why? How does that work? Is sort of the question. And there is some research coming out on that now. So I saw a paper earlier this year where they were able to identify immune cells, like cancer fighting immune cells in the breast of mothers who had, long ago stopped breastfeeding. Their children are grown now, but they could see the echo of that breastfeeding in terms of immune cells that are still sticking around in the breast. So that's really cool. Maybe they're helping to fight off cancer, and there's other ideas too. There's also cardiovascular disease. So that must be like a different mechanism, but we see moms who have breastfed have a lower chance of developing type 2 diabetes later in life. So it's somehow protecting their metabolic systems. And yeah, I think this is fascinating. And once again, an example of understanding that and having that evidence, bringing it to mothers, bringing it to policymakers, like that's yet one more piece of information for them to weigh out when they make their decisions.
Mm.
Um, and also, again, for women who never had kids and never had the chance to breastfeed, are there things we could learn from this type of evidence that we could help prevent cardiovascular disease and cancer in those women, right? Like if it's about certain hormones or immune cell, like are there ways we could use that information to prevent cancer and cardiovascular disease in all women? And I think there are lessons that we could learn that could help us do that.
God, it's so hard to stick to one thing, and I guess that's one of the things that I've noticed and felt frustration about the kind of the way our human brains work. And I include my own very much in that as well, that you get a sort of a special interest and you go, oh, that's the thing. And I want to look at that specifically. And studies with the health of children, they tend to not include early months, early feeding. They just did the data about whether that child was breastfed or not. It's just not even there. It's about what happens from weaning time, so from solids. It's all about the actual food of solids, and but breastfeeding doesn't seem to feature much. And actually, it has an effect on so much that it seems madness not to bring it in, because we can look at all of these health issues in isolation and even isolate the child from the mother. And it seems like we're getting to the point where we're noticing that even that is a mistake. Like even separating the health of the child from the health of the mother is a mistake. There's a
Oh
sort of
yeah.
symbiosis going on there as well, which is beautiful. Like it's, and I think most of us mothers we kind of know this. Like it's in our body. It's like when you have your baby, and the with the best intentions in the world, there's very much a oh well, I'll take him out for a walk and give you a break, and I'm like, no, don't take my baby. I'd leave my
Yeah,
baby with me. Go and do other things, But like it's very strong. But I think especially maybe in Western culture, we're kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, no, sure, okay, because you're kind of caught up in a system where you don't want to offend your mother-in-law or and
right.
but actually this kind of impulse that's in our own cells, in our own bones to stay, to be like one element. And it's exhausting as well. So I can understand this is such a messed with my mind, certainly going, I am desperate for a break from this child, and I also don't want him to go anywhere at all at
Yeah,
any point. It's such a so how do we support mothers? That's
amazing.
a whole other podcast again. But what I'm sort of saying just is it seems like your experience and your research is really bringing in focus really sharply, this focus that you can't look at tiny little things in well, I mean you can, but we
Yeah.
should probably try not to look at tiny things in isolation, but join some dots here.
Yeah, I love the term the fourth trimester, which I
Yeah.
think is a really powerful way of, everyone knows pregnancy has 3 trimesters and then it's over. And it's like, well, then it's into the fourth trimester, which is this really important postpartum period where you're still like you cannot be untangled from your baby because this lactation is happening, and that is not a one-way system. It's a two-way system between the mom and the baby and back and forth. And it's so critical to everything, all the systems that are still developing, because the baby's not born as a like tiny adult fully formed, right? Their brain is still developing, their immune system is still developing. And so their microbiome is really key to that. And what's driving the microbiome is the breast milk. So all of this is so crucially important. So yes, to your point, if you start a study when a baby is 6 months old and starting on cell, you have missed a very important part of the evolution of that life. A lot of my research can be categorized as being part of the DOHAD hypothesis, which is the developmental origins of health and disease. So the idea that very early in life, things that are happening, exposures that are occurring, are going to shape the rest of your life.
So really to kind of sum up, it's not just a liquid that is one thing that does what it needs to do over time because the needs remain the same. It is ever changing. The needs of the baby are ever changing. The milk is ever changing, and the milk is influencing the pace at which the baby's body picks up, relates, sorts through, makes decisions about what microbes it's going to take on, which it doesn't want yet. It's a I mean it's a whole I don't even know how to
System.
describe it. It's a whole
Yeah,
system.
yeah. That's a wonderful way to like sum it up and describe it. And to your point of, all these dots and but they're connected. Like, yes, we can look at the dots individually. And I think actually we need people to do that to understand them very deeply. Like, how does this
Mm,
HMO in the milk work? How does this microbe in the gut work? And we need people that like really deeply focus on that. But
yeah.
then we need other people who come and put those dots together. And that's what I have tried to do in my research is, bring people together who really deeply understand the gut microbes or the HMOs in the milk or the process of lactation or the nutrients in the milk or the antibodies in the milk and sort of bring them together as a team and say, okay, you each know your parts, but how do they fit together? Because that's a whole other level of information and understanding that we really need to make progress.
Yeah.
And I think we're at a time where technologies are allowing us to do that in a way that we never could before. So, for example, with the microbes, it used to be that to study a microbe, you have to culture it in a dish in the lab and then see what it does, which has a whole lot of limitations because, as you can imagine, the microbes that live in your nose or your gut, they might not be very happy to live in a dish in your lab because it's the wrong temperature, it's got the wrong food or whatever. So then we just wouldn't know anything about it. But
Yeah.
now we have technologies where, without growing the microbes, we can just sequence their genetic material and know that they were there and measure them and count them. So we have this ability to sort of see what we couldn't before. And in a similar way, in terms of connecting the dots, we have like machine learning and AI ways of accumulating all this data and starting to sift through and make sense of how it all connects. So we're both at a time technologically where we can do more than we could before. And I think socially, where women's health, as you say, is sort of experiencing a reckoning, like there's a recognition that, okay, for many years, because it was men running medicine and research, they didn't pay much attention to women's issues like lactation, so a lot of these, and not just milk, but menopause and menstruation, these things were not really studied because they were not deemed important. That's changing. That's changing in a big way, and that's really good to see. Um, in some ways, I think lactation's sort of fallen through the cracks because it's not in all of these sort of women's health initiatives. So I'd like to see that change, and I think there's clues that it might be. But it does sort of fall through the cracks sometimes because it's like, oh, was it women's health? No, it's infant nutrition. It's
I,
science.
I,
No,
I,
it's signaling, and it just falls through and gets covered nowhere.
I have a
So that's one
theory
thing.
that is the one thing that we can well, we can't replicate it, but we've found a commercial way around that, and it's the one thing that has, been uh I
Yeah, like
don't know
we
how to say
solved
this
this
without
problem, and we
annoying
don't
a
need
lot of people, but it's so there's a very there's a lot of commercial interests in involved. It's wild, isn't it? Just listen up, listen to mothers more. Well, thank you so much. That was incredible. I'm sure I'll have loads more questions that come up in the middle of the night, 4 o'clock in the morning. I'll be like, oh, I should have asked this.
so much fun. Well, I mean, we talked about one paper. There's so many more.
Yeah,
So
I know. And then obviously there's the whole piece of like, so there's the research, which is incredible. It's happened. It's occurred. And then there's the sort of the distribution of this information, because it needs to get to the policymakers, it needs to get to the parents, it needs to get to our communities, it needs to kind of become embedded in our cultural knowledge. And then systems need to be put into place to support the decisions that we already want. We already want to breastfeed, but there are a lot of
yeah,
forces at play. So there are different stages, like, so it's great to kind of go, okay, let's see what we can do on all of those stages. And there are great people doing great work on all those fronts.
and as you say that, I sort of think about in the same way that we talked about like milk and mothers and babies as a system where there's all these different points and you have to think of them together, like this idea of science influencing policy and practice, like that's a system with many different dots along the way, and we have to connect them all as you were describing. And that's where I think we're a good team because I'm helping do the science, but then I need other people to help move it into the public consciousness because I'm well aware that most people will never read my science papers, right? Other scientists will, and it's free on the internet, so people are welcome to read it. But I'm well aware that for most people, it's not written in a way that's digestible to them. So talking about it in conversations like this
Yeah.
and having people like you kind of illustrate it and put it in a different way just is so important.
Yeah, I mean, like, feeling like an idiot is a feature of my 11 years at Human Milk. But as you said earlier, it's a feature, not a bug. Like,
Yes,
it's the kind of a superpower to go, wait, what? No, I didn't get any of that. Wait, what are we talking about now? What's the bit in the middle? Because it is complex, and it needs to be, because it is, and then it needs to be digested and understood. And then, as I kind of think about it, as in terms of my background is sort of in film and music and stuff. It's like if Hollywood made films and then there was no marketing, there was no distribution, it never ended up in the
right.
cinema. Like, what's with that?
What's the point?
You put all your money into the making of the film, but nobody goes out and distributes it. That's insane. It's sort of,
Yeah.
so, with the intention of kind of, yeah, getting further down the line with all this, because your research is just, it's mind blowing. It's
Yeah.
absolutely
Well,
mind
thank you.
blowing, and it's just got to be out there. So thank you so much for having this conversation. Let's make this a regular thing until we've got it all
I
all
love it.
out there.